Welcome to the Future of Teamwork podcast, where we explore cutting-edge strategies to keep teams human-centered, drive innovation, and empower you with the tools and insights needed to help your team excel and thrive in today's rapidly changing world. Your host is Dane Groeneveld, a seasoned expert with over 20 years of experience enhancing team dynamics and innovation. Today, Dane is joined by Jason P. Carroll. Jason is a leadership strategist and trusted advisor to businesses navigating growth and change. He's the founder and CEO of Aptive Index, a company revolutionizing hiring and leadership practices with advanced psychometric assessments and strategic advisory services. Tune in to learn more about, first, the role of self-awareness in leadership. Jason emphasizes how self-awareness played a crucial role in his leadership journey, highlighting the need for leaders to recognize their strengths and blind spots. Second, using AI to challenge thinking. Jason shows how AI can act as a thought partner, providing unique perspectives and unexpected solutions. Finally, the power of perspective taking. Jason shares how stepping into his employees' world gave him deeper insight, highlighting the value of leaders immersing in their team's experiences. So, teamwork makes the dream work, and we're here to inspire your next collaborative breakthrough. Gather your team or put on your headphones, and let's dive in together.
Welcome to the Future of Teamwork podcast. My name's Dane Groeneveld, CEO of the Huddle 3 Group, and today I'm joined by Jason Carroll out of Austin, Texas. Jason's the CEO of Aptive Index, also hosting a podcast, the Work Culture podcast, correct?
Yeah, Work Cultured with a D at the end, yeah.
Got it. Awesome. So it's going to be fun to have you on the other side of the mic today, Jason. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
So tell us a little bit more about you.
Yeah, man. To kind of get me to the journey of where I am right now was a perfect record. I never made any mistakes in leadership, and oh wait, no, that's not even remotely true. I've been really lucky throughout my career. Been given some really cool opportunities, especially considering that I am virtually unemployable. I mean, I am the kind of person that just really can steamroll and make some big mistakes in leadership. I'm just kind of like all gas, no brakes. And that had served me well. It had also, caused some issues throughout my career. But at my last company, it was called Champion National Security. And I was there for 7 years. During that time, we grew from 800 to 2,500 employees and then sold at the end of 2020. And that was also during a 7-year period where I was doing a lot of self-reflection. I got to meet and be trained by Dr. Brene Brown. I got introduced to a lot of psychology tools, psychometrics, and assessments. I gained a ton of self-awareness. I made a ton of mistakes in leadership. And through that journey, really just kind of fell in love with this idea of what self-awareness can do for oneself. And, Aptive Index, the company that I've now launched, is in that space. It's in that realm. As I mentioned to you before we hit record, self-awareness doesn't sell, right? There's no ROI there. So we're one test to fix hiring. That's the tagline. It's all about hiring because hiring sucks. But the people that come in and really engage with me and the data, we never come away unscathed. There's always this great learning process. And so, that's kind of my whole shtick now is I always want to learn. I always want to grow and help empower others to do the same.
That's super cool. It's a hell of a story too. I like the way you describe it as lucky, but people create their own luck. And to go from 800 to 2,500 employees there with Champion National Security, that's a scale journey not a lot of people have experience of.
Yeah, the thing about it, and I say luck because I think that has to be part of self-awareness, is there's a lot of people that are like, I'm a self-made man, like bull stuff. I don't know if there's a cuss jar on this podcast, but bull, right? Nobody's a self-made man. All of our circumstances, the people we met, the time and place that we were led us to where we are. And I think it's healthy to be able to look at, that growth trajectory. You're looking back at the graph, looking at year over year and the growth, I'm like, God, there's a lot of that I really am proud of. And there's also the reality that success is the most dangerous form of failure because it makes me think I'm doing everything right. And so when I start realizing that this isn't all because of me, some of it is really in spite of me, that's when I can move past any of those shame gremlins of mistakes I've made and actually learn and grow from them.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I think that's one thing, and I'm really excited to dive into the Aptive Index, but it's one thing that I've always been concerned about with psychometric assessments is they tend to be used by leaders to be like, hey, I've got this, which allows me to make this decision about you. But it's very rare that the leader is starting to think about, well, how's that person going to interact with them and where do they sit on the profile and what are they working on? Going back to your point that, self-awareness doesn't have an ROI, but it really does. We just don't.
It's not on the P&L. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So how do you see that?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of those assessments that you really use destructive language, and it really just I don't think it does much good. There are ones that I've even used and been a client of that people look at their results and it's almost like they're ashamed of them, like they wish that they were some other type of profile, and that gives me the ick. One of the big things I wanted to create was a tool of empowerment. Like I want somebody to read about themselves and be like, yes, like these are my superpowers. We all have caution areas, and it would be stupid to not pay attention to those. But yeah, we try to use super positive language throughout the whole thing, with a splash of, take a look at these blind spots.
Yeah, absolutely. So how does it play out then? So you've got the super powerful language. You mentioned, one test to fix hiring. Are you predominantly using this at the interview stage, or are you using it in existing, intact teams as well?
It is both. Because the ROI is on that front end, at least the one you can see, the one you can actually tie to. I mean, if you avoid one mishire, you've paid for the software times 10, right? So
yes.
I mean, it's a no-brainer. But the smart clients are the ones that bring it in and they use it beyond that hire. Heck, let's customize onboarding. Let's create a different flow for those people, right? If you're going to onboard me, throw me to the sharks. But if you do that to somebody who is like craving all the tools and resources and manuals and trainings, then they're going to check out on day 2, if not hour 2. Then they use it for team dynamics. They use it for coaching in a certain role, like where are you struggling and why might that be based on the psychometric assessment, not because you're bad in some way, but because you're hardwired and you have drives that are kind of in opposition of aspects of this job. Like when I have to go super in minutia and details, that's outside of my hardwiring. I have to do it, but I'm going to struggle. So why not acknowledge that and coach to it and have coping strategies for it?
That's very cool. I personally would probably align with that throw me to the sharks mentality on onboarding. And I would say most of the teams and companies that I've had the pleasure of leading have probably fallen into that like me kind of concept as, hey, just go get stuck in rather than really putting the time in to work out what different people need.
Yeah. And that's a great for a startup, to get those throw to the sharks people. But then nothing actually gets done once you start leveling off and hit maintenance mode. You have to have those in the weeds. I talk about the lens, like I'm the wide angle lens. I'm seeing everything, the whole landscape, but you have to have those telephoto lenses, the people that can zoom in and see the work that needs to be done and really focus on it and enjoy getting into those details and execution. But those people have different needs when it comes to onboarding and learning those skills. And even how does that person integrate into the team and feel like they belong in a group of a bunch of wild card initial startup folks?
Yeah. And the flip, I guess, goes very much to a steady state business where they've got a lot of really detail oriented, narrow focused people who are great at doing their part of the business, but they're not ready to really break stuff down and shift as the market changes or as a new technology comes in.
Yeah. Yeah. And having a balance, you always go back to the Blockbuster story, right? Like
Yeah.
they could not see that bigger picture and dug their heels into the way things have always been done.
Yep.
And look, I mean, if you want to avoid vulnerabilities in your business, then do things the way they've always been done, and you will probably be successful, unless the world around you is changing and you're not getting up to that 20,000 foot view to see what the heck might also be happening.
Yeah, I think that's a huge one. We talked to a number of guests around healthy conflict, which I think wasn't happening in that Blockbuster scenario. It doesn't happen in a lot of teams.
Yeah.
And one of my good friends, Eric, he was saying to me the other day about one of our teams, he was like, look, everyone here is really nice. Everyone's very considerate. Everyone's quite detail oriented. Maybe that's a blind spot for us. Maybe we need someone to kind of come in and, going back to your earlier story, someone who's all gas, no brakes, just comes in with ideas and steamrolls through and, creates a bit of that healthy tension.
Yeah. Yeah. We're actually really big on that. So, even talking about the assessment itself, to be effective in the hiring process, we have to look at positions and know what those targets are for the traits that we're measuring, right? Well, getting that right is huge, because if I set target ranges for these attributes and now I look at somebody who's 99% match, like, oh, great, they're a perfect match. But if I got the ranges wrong, then it does me no good. And what's fascinating, the mechanism we built into the software for trying to collaborate with your contributors and stakeholders and people making that decision to come up with those ranges, it creates conflict on purpose, because you're all taking this different type of survey that's apart from the assessment itself, and all the results come in, and maybe we'll have 8 people with like 6 really similar, and then like 1 super outlier, and then 1 that's kind of like in between, didn't understand the assignment. Well, who wins? How do we really how do we click save on the right range? Well, all of a sudden we're having this conflict, healthy conflict and candor. And I had a client just a couple of weeks ago. I wish I could talk. They're publicly traded and international. I can't say the name of them, but that was happening. And afterwards they were like, okay, 2 things. A, we have never, ever spent this much time thinking about what we really wanted out of this role.
Yeah.
And B, as a leadership team, we haven't actually argued like this in a year, 2 years, right? And that was, oh man, that felt so good. I was like, wow, we got you guys talking. And then we revisited that later and like, all right, let's look at your CEO. All right, let's look at this attribute. Like it's skyrocket high. It's this like influence, impact. Like I want to have my fingerprint on ideas. I want to shape my outcomes and the people around me, the events, right? That's this guy's highest attribute for internal drive and need. Well, that's also one of his lowest is that like sociability, warmth, approachability, right? So he's intimidating as heck.
Yeah.
He wants the feedback, but nobody's giving it because they're intimidated by him. Like, okay, well, let's just look at that from a pure data in a spreadsheet point of view. And maybe we can actually start changing behaviors. Like, because look at this other attribute. Look at this pro-social score here. Like this dude wants pushback. He wants everyone's ideas. So lean into that driver and just ignore that, he's intimidating and see where that goes, And so it's really, really cool to be able to look at these team dynamics and like, they took a 7-minute assessment and now I'm peering into their soul. And I'm like, this is why you haven't been able to confront your boss. And they're like, whoa,
It's not huge unlock.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's a cheat code. It's absolutely fascinating.
So in that context, Jason, you have to look at the boss and the peer group of reports all at the same time with the same report, or are you calibrating the report in different ways?
Yeah, the assessment itself is going to give us these results, and we can actually plot those on these quadrants and see, between people's like reasoning approach and approach to people, their approach to problem solving, their that lens that I was talking about a minute ago, like the big wide angle versus the telephoto. It uses those kind of sub attributes and plots people out on a quadrant chart, and you can see like very visually, here are my high flyers, here are my people glue, here am I get shit done, right? And so like being able to see that and visualize it, just, I mean, you can, it's almost like you see a actual light bulb going off in people's heads.
Yeah. It's already going off for me. So in theory, you can, with that spatial awareness, you can kind of say, hey, our team's lacking for, the get shit done people.
Yep.
Yeah.
And maybe that particular team, it's okay. That's not that team's function, right? With like the goal isn't perfect balance. The goal is knowing, what are we actually pursuing? What is the purpose of this team? And are we built for it?
Yes.
And that can change per initiative. It can change for an entire company, depending on where they are in their growth stage. And so it's something you have to kind of revisit over time as well. It's not, you don't set it and forget it.
It's very cool when you think about how we hear so much talk about living in a data-driven world and data-driven decision-making. But to your point with that publicly traded company earlier, just putting some data around a conversation piece actually brings out the conflict. And I wonder why that is. Is it because the data it's not of someone's kind of body of work, it's coming from a third party, so people feel safer, negotiating and challenging each other in that?
I think that's really insightful. There's another podcast that I like to listen to called You Are Not So Smart.
Uh-huh.
And they recently had one where they brought on the creators of it was like some AI chatbot that was like a conspiracy theory debunker or something. And their hypothesis was, this isn't going to work because we know that facts don't change people's minds. Well, it turns out this debunker AI bot was changing people's minds, like on actual conspiracy theory topics. Huh. And they're positing exactly what you just said. Like, you take the human element out of it, the ability to jump down somebody's throat, or the ability to, surprise them with some, quirky fact that, they haven't heard, so it throws them off their game, or the desire to win an argument, right? And now it's just, is this data real? I mean, okay, huh? So yeah, I think you're spot on.
There's power to it. We recently did some work with Maggie Jackson, who authored a book called Uncertain. And she looks at people's tolerance for uncertainty. And some of her research points to the fact that if you're a very senior person, you can become very automatic in the way you operate with your own work, but also with your teams. And yet, if you can embrace that uncertainty individually and as a team, particularly if you've got a data set to get into, you can start asking a lot of questions and almost running these little mini sprints. It's not 2 weeks of work. It might be a 4 or 5 minute question. What if this data was wrong? Or what if our opinion about this sales leader's need for, pro-social skills or whatever it was is wrong?
Yeah.
And just by casting those questions out there, it invites the team into a very sort of playful, uncertain environment where, light bulbs might pop.
Yeah, I'm going to need an introduction to her, by the way. That's
we'll arrange that.
Down the rabbit hole. Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, the tolerance or appetite for uncertainty or risk, that's a big deal. Security is a baseline need for everyone, and uncertainty puts all that at risk. So I get it. Although I do have a high tolerance.
Which is really interesting. I'd love to actually see. We don't seem to have done a lot of research on uncertainty, which I think why Maggie wrote the book. But I'd love to see that in more profiles and understand where has uncertainty played a key role in navigating an outside challenge or going through a major change in a business. I'm sure we'll find that it's there more often than not.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Huh.
That's pretty cool. So. Continuing back to your story there of steamrolling in as a leader, I'm intrigued by that. Like, as you look at just the degree of change that a lot of businesses are going through right now, I often find myself, even in my own teams, getting frustrated with this speed to action. Like, we're trying to do too many things. We're not moving fast enough on the one or two big bets. And as a leader, I find that really hard. But the flip side is steamrolling through and like where are teams, particularly with intergenerational teams, where are teams finding that a challenge or an opportunity having a leader that just comes in and is just a hard driver?
Yeah, there are pluses and minuses to it. So I'm very decisive, which a lot of times is called for. But when that's the default, and before I started implementing strategies to combat that, the impact was that my team didn't feel like they had a voice, right? So instead of getting all of the best ideas on the table, it was just Jason's idea. Well, guess what? I ain't that smart, So I was lowering the collective intelligence, right? And if my goal is the best outcome for the company, then I should be raising that collective intelligence, getting all the ideas on the table, creating a consensus. And there's also way better byproduct impact too, because if you do that, the people feel more empowered. They feel like their contributions matter more. So they're more engaged, which, good ideas beget more good ideas. And, and now there's a ripple effect, and so I definitely made those mistakes in leadership where I just, and the thing is too, if you're doing this yourself, it doesn't mean you're an arrogant prick.
Yeah,
it just means you're just on autopilot. You're on this decisive path, and you probably have good ideas, and that you need to push and hold people accountable to get them done.
Yeah,
but there's a sacrifice, and so you have to figure out how to step back from that and go, all right, what does this situation actually call for here?
I like that. I like that for the lens of a leader. So if someone's listening in today and they're a leader and they're like, gee, I steamroll pretty hard. This might give me some perspective. What about if you flip it? What about the lens of a team member who has a steamroller boss? Like, what from your journey and from what you're learning with Aptive Index kind of points towards some of those mechanics for building confidence to go and challenge or to go and have a conversation, or at least to fact check, why might this be happening?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, like if somebody is a steamroller and they're not going to change, then there's not much you can do. But I think what happens is the folks that are more like, they're happy to help. They want to play a support role. They don't want to create conflict, right? But they do want to have boundaries and stand up for themselves. There's something about their wiring that looks at a Jason, pre-self-awareness and says, there's no way he, in fact, if I say anything, it's going to get me in trouble. Well, there's a good number of steamrolly bull in a china shop leaders who do want and need that feedback. And like my client, 100% is somebody who wants to be pushed back against. So was I. And I'm impossible to offend. But people didn't know that. And even if I said it, they're not going to believe it very easily. So I think the biggest answer to your question is to question your own assumptions of the person that probably needs to be talked to. And, then go to, ChatGPT and explain your situation, figure out how can I word this to my jerk boss?
That's real too. I'm hearing more and more people do that, like almost run a role play against ChatGPT.
Yep. I have a different AI. I use Claude more than I use ChatGPT, and I have a whole virtual board of directors that I run things by that all have their own Aptive Index profiles, their age, their background, their expertise. It's ridiculous, but
we need to dive into that because that's just blown my mind. So you actually can set these personas up. Did you create the profile and say, hey, I want them to act like this?
Both of the primaries, ChatGPT and Claude, will let you create either a project or your own custom GPT. And so I've trained them on all of our science and the attributes we're measuring and what it means, as well as all the profile nicknames. So I use that to say, okay, I've got, so-and-so who's a maven, and their background is legal and finance, whatever. I've got so-and-so who's a doctor, Dr. Elena Rodriguez is, an artisan or whatever it is, right? And so they all have their own Aptive Index profiles, ranging from that like big visionary person who's gone and raised funds and bought and sold companies to the professor, kind of, CPA, whatever, right? And so they each have their own Aptive Index profile names, which gives them a broad spectrum of like how they give input. And I will literally go to Claude and I'll say, time for a board meeting. I don't want to run it. Pick someone to start the board meeting. And it will dialogue as it gets confused sometimes. It's like, would you like me to make an introduction? And I'm like, you don't actually know that person. Like, you didn't actually work at Sun Microsystems. Okay. But so it does get confused, but it's really neat because I don't actually have to do anything. And it's helped me hone in on like, what is my burn rate and why, what can give in my budget, and what's my break even? How many more clients do I need Q1? What are my strategies? That's pretty dang impressive.
That's really impressive.
And one of the best prompts that I heard when you're looking for ideas is to say, give me a non-obvious answer, or give me 3 non-obvious solutions, or whatever, like making it think outside the box. I just did it earlier today, and for a TEDx education talk that I have to give. And I'm like, man, this topic's fine, but it's boring. I need something that's going to really like hit, and it gave me some great ideas.
Oh, it sounds so cool. And the benefit of having these individuals set out with their own Aptive indexes versus just asking the ChatGPT or the Claude direct, like, how does that support you over time? Is that just covering for blind spots, or what else might it do?
Yeah, it is. So, Dr. Rodriguez is a sage. I'm looking at background in IO psychology, former head of people science at LinkedIn. Not really, right? But, and she has her own demographics and all that kind of stuff. So she's there for like research guidance, ethical oversight when it comes to our validation, helping with the frameworks, the credibility and all that, right? Because that's not me. I've actually hired psychologists. Obviously, I can't come up with a psychometric by myself. But they're expensive, right? So I don't want to have to get my psychometrician or IO psychologist on the line every time I, have brainstorming that I want to do. So I can brainstorm with a fake psychologist here on Claude, and then I can go over to Michael Washington, the serial entrepreneur. Like, well, what do you think, man? Like, I know this is outside of your realm, but like, what have you been thinking about through this conversation? Yeah,
that's cool. Will they interact with each other too?
Only in so much as they will give different ideas to the same question, right. But they haven't like talked back and forth. No.
Interesting. I wonder if I could make but I guess you could manually kind of say, take Washington's question and put it to the doctor, and response and put it to the doctor.
Yeah, I maybe next time I go and I say, show me the actual mock dialogue between Washington and Rodriguez on this topic. That could be neat. Like, don't just give me the final answer. Show me how they got there.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, I mean, there's a number of guests that I've spoken to about when technology is a team member, and this example of a virtual board is a perfect example of how that's already taking shape.
Yeah, I'm going to be the thought leader, but AI can be my thought partner.
Yeah,
and I think
that's a
with
good
that
balance.
mentality, like, sure, I mean, it can help me write an email faster, great, but that's not really what's going to propel us forward. It's that strategic partner that's going to really like unlock new things.
Yeah, it's super cool. And tell me a bit more about the podcast, Jason. What got you started on Work Cultured?
Man, so at Champion, the security firm, the game changer was culture. I had, right out of college, my first career job was like the worst culture I've even heard of. Like it was horrible. Boiler room, just terrible. But I didn't know any better. And then I went from there to like to Dell. So, I'm at a Fortune 50, and there are segments of Dell that people hate, but I ended up in a great segment where the leader there, Nicole Collins, if she's ever listening, one of the best leaders I've ever encountered. And she had created an amazing culture. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is what work can look and feel like. This is life-changing. So, and then I had a startup that I did for a few years, and then I ended up at Champion. And at Champion, there was an opportunity as it pertained to culture, because their culture kind of sucked. The old guard was like, hire people as cheap as you can get them, treat them like crap, cuss them out, and throw them to the curb when they fail.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, well, what if we didn't do that? And by treating people with worth and value, that's actually what I believe disrupted the industry. It wasn't the technology and whatever innovation. It was, we just started treating people like humans. So I saw firsthand the power of strong culture for myself. And then I was able to see it play out as kind of a redemption story at Champion, and seeing that impact, seeing people's lives changed. I was just like, man, I got to stay in the circle. I have to talk to leaders about culture. That's all I want to do. I just want to talk to leaders about culture. Because also, I sold the company and then I was like, I have no idea what I'm going to do next. They don't warn you how much identity and purpose you have wrapped up into that damn job. And when it's gone, you're like, who am I? What am I doing? That was
jarring. I can only
whole different
imagine.
podcast, but but yeah, I got to, I've been able to talk to just amazing CEOs and heads of HR. Like, what are your challenges? What are your secrets? How do you envision the future of the workplace? And of course, started it kind of coming right out of the COVID, which shook everything up as far as what work looks like. Now we have interesting topics because Amazon is like, everyone should work in the office again. I was like, what crack are you smoking? Stop gaslighting the entire country when we have actual statistics showing how much more productive people can be. Whatever. That's, again, different podcast. But work culture is where good companies keep good company. And we just talk to leaders about challenges and secrets and all that. It's great.
That's super cool. It's interesting that kind of originated out of your time there at Champion. We see so much in the literature and in podcasts around knowledge workers and all that we're doing for knowledge workers. But when you think about a security business, there's a lot of frontline workers. They're not necessarily desk-based positions. There's shifts and there's not a lot of. I don't feel that there's a lot of agency that's been explored or experimented with in that space. So, going back to that time, what were some of the culture shifts that you made with that group of employees?
Yeah, the biggest one, there was no vision, no mission statement. There were no core values. There was nothing, zero. So creating that, but then making sure it wasn't just a bunch of words on a poster, making sure that these core values really did take root. And the first and foremost was people matter much. It was kind of a weird way to put it, but it worked really well. People matter much. And so we started, anytime we would have to have a discipline conversation, or anytime we had a praise conversation, we would tie it back to a core value. I started doing handwritten notes that I would mail out to all the different branches across the US. And they would be about a core value, not just, hey, good job, here's a trophy. It was, hey, when you did this, you really exemplified this core value. And, then we had to get out of our comfort zone. We started doing a semi-regular, the executive team has to go hit the streets at 4 a.m. and bring donuts to the guards on post. We started raising our rates as much as we could. We fired one of our top 3 clients because they weren't treating our people the way we needed them to treat our people. Which that was a whole fight with the original founder. That was a big one. When you see that revenue is going to drop $36,000 a week and you promise that it's not going to impact profit, that's a hell of a bold claim. And it took probably 4 months of it actually being true before he actually believed me. Wow. I was like, dude, the numbers don't lie. Yeah, here's the dip in revenue. Here's the net profit.
Yeah.
This one dropped. This didn't change. Right. So
just because of that cost of delivery on the tough customer.
Yep.
Yeah.
But that freed up those people now to not have to work with this high maintenance customer. We got to replace some of those officers in positions where they could thrive and where they felt part of the culture of the client too, not just the company they worked for.
Yeah.
It made a huge difference. I even saw that founder come around.
Yeah.
There were some amazing stories where he was the initiator of people matter much, stuff that I would have never expected. And it was really cool to see.
That's so rewarding, as the architect of that culture to see the old guard pick it up. I can only imagine.
Yeah. And it wasn't perfect. We didn't permeate every single employee.
No.
We did things as leadership team. I did things myself that didn't exemplify those values at times. But for the most part, I think we did a really, really good job of making them real behaviors and actually true to our hearts and not just words on a poster.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, one of the big reasons I've always been fascinated by teamwork is that in 3,000 years of, modern teams and organizations, or semi-modern, no one's really got it right. Like, everyone's still in search of a winning formula. There's moments, periods, you'll have a team that just gets on a real run, but it's so dynamic and things are always changing. So I think it is very human, and that's what's endearing about it, but also it's what creates that challenge that I think sparks a lot of energy for many of us.
Yeah, I agree completely.
The example of firing the client, Jason, I think that's a phenomenal one, particularly, if we've got someone listening to the show today who's sitting there dealing with whether it's a body of work or a customer that just drains energy from the team. It's so important today, I think more so than ever, to actually think about the energy levels of the team and to think about the quality of the work. And yet so many businesses are so top line motivated that to give away a big customer is, it's not even on the table.
Yeah. And you can't just do it arbitrarily, right? And we didn't. I think we might have been following either the book Traction, or maybe it was Good to Great. It was one of those books, right? Where they were like, you have to know what makes a grade A client, right? So we had a list of 5 bullet points of these are the questions we ask and evaluate, is this a great client? And every client didn't have to get 5 of 5, right?
Yeah.
But if they were only 3 of 5, we were asking big questions. This client was 1 of 5.
Right.
When we finally actually created that framework and did the exercise, it was a no-brainer. There was no going back, actually. We voted on it and we talked about it, but just how do we go back? We know that these are the things that we need from a client, and they don't hit any of them except for they pay the bill like that. What? So yeah, don't just go firing your clients, right?
Build the measure
the measure and make sure it's the right levers too.
Yeah. And I can only imagine that when you stand behind your values like that as a company, even to those people who aren't really believing or getting behind it, everyone's like, oh, wow, that's a material artifact of change and of leadership standing behind their values.
We had some people offering up the next lamb. They're like, how about this client? we can get rid of them too.
Yeah.
But actually that's a real story. The thing there though, that was really special is we did go to them and we said, hey, look, here are some of the levers that we don't feel like we're aligned on. Mm-hmm. And we have renewal coming up. We'd like to work this into our negotiations. And they did.
Yeah.
They actually became a better client.
I think that's a great story because there's a corporate learning and sort of growth that comes from that, which is uncomfortable. Many of us tend to be sort of price takers, order takers, particularly when working with larger customers in small business environments. But gee, that really builds some muscle.
So our whole business was people, right? Direct labor, that's what we pay. That's how we bill. And so when the entire product is the person on post and that person's not being treated well, it did shine a light when something was broken. And once we had those definitions, being able to step away from the top line was a lot easier.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I like the way that you described when you were explaining building the culture that you put the executive team out on the streets with donuts, get out there and see what the graveyard shift or the early shift looks like. Yeah. Because I think more and more, particularly the newer generation of team members, that they want to see leaders out and about, in doing some of the work or at least recognizing them in their place of work. And that's often overlooked.
Yeah. And there's also some reality too of myself out of the entire team knew the least about security.
Yeah.
It's not what I was brought in for. I was brought in for technology originally and then ended up, kind of being placed at the helm. And so I was like, well, there was at one point where there was like an incident with a gun. And so I had to like take the gun and make it safe and put it in a safe and all that kind of thing. And I was talking to my head of HR, like, that's the first time or I said something like, I've never even shot a gun. And she's like, do not tell any of our employees that. And
please
shoot a gun now. And so I was like, I immediately, I was like, all right, Uncle Bill, who's an actual instructor. I was like, you're taking me to the range, man. So it's just silly stories like that. Like you can't, but until that silly story, I didn't really think about the impact it would have had if my security officers were like, this ass clown doesn't even know how to shoot a gun. Like, well, he doesn't know anything about being in my shoes. I mean, that's what the actual deeper story would have communicated. And so it's like, yeah, I mean, this is not some just silly thing I have to do. Like, not only do I have to do this, I also have to do, and I ended up going and pursuing all these other silly things like, no, not really silly. I'm using that word intentionally joke, but what is called use of force training. Like where you go through these simulations and like, when do you have to actually shoot someone?
Yep.
Right. Like that's a whole different mind screw, that again, I did not know what it was like to be in those shoes, whether it's an armed officer or a police officer or whatever, I'm like, okay, this is how I build actual empathy, is being able to take someone else's perspective. And so that was my personal story, but it was things like that we did as a leadership team, just be like, let's make sure we understand what these people's worlds are like.
I think that's super powerful. It actually reminds me, I went to the Mob Museum in Las Vegas, which for anyone who's not been, like when you're in Vegas, take a side trip and hit the Mob Museum. It's awesome. And they had one of those simulations where you went in with a group of people armed as law enforcement officers, and you had to work out that use of force. Mm-hmm. And they had a real live actor in the end room, and it was phenomenal.
We probably did the same thing in Vegas.
So good.
That's where I did it. So it was really good.
And it gives you a lot of perspective, which I think in our digital worlds, we can often lose a lot of perspective in our teams.
Yeah. It's really easy to point. And that's one example, but it's so easy to point to a person you disagree with. Maybe it's politics, maybe it's religion, maybe it's just at work. I mean, that's what we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Like, why did you do that? How could you do that at work? Like, well, we're different people. We have different experience. We have different life. We have different hardwiring. That's why. We fail to meet each other's expectations all the time because of things that are totally outside of our control. And there's so many situations like that happen where nobody's right. I wasn't the wild card who was going to jump out of the plane with no parachute, and my COO was not the stick in the mud who wouldn't embrace any change. We were both wrong.
Yes,
but we had opposite
and both a little bit right too.
And both a little bit right. Absolutely, yeah.
It's cool. I mean, there's so much we've covered today, Jason. I definitely want to get you back to do our new Leader Lab series, because you've got so much breadth from being an operator and a leader who's gone and grown businesses, but also now with Aptive Index, building this great tool for so many other customers and companies to use. Some of the things that we touched on, having tough conversations about the purpose of the role. I think that's a huge unlock that your tool seems to be bringing. And the fact that data can create a bit more safety for challenge amongst leaders. The example you shared, I think is awesome. And that leads into, giving the team a voice. I loved how you talked about increasing collective intelligence versus lowering it. It's a big opportunity for all leaders and teams. Yeah. The virtual board of directors, like you and I are going to have to carve out some time. I want to see that in play. That's super cool.
Totally.
And the super prompt on the non-obvious, give me a non-obvious solution. I think for many of us that are embracing AI, that's a huge plus.
Yeah. To be fair on that one, Jeff Woods, Geoff, Woods, I heard him speak a keynote, and I stole that from him. So definitely give him the credit and go read that book, whatever it's called.
All right. Well, we'll add that in the show notes too. Yeah. And then this final piece just on like protecting the energy of the people and creating the culture in a people-first business. I mean, that's a huge call out for any leaders and teams. So if any of our listeners want to find Aptive Index, find the Work Cultured podcast, where do they go looking?
Yeah, workcultured.com, aptiveindex.com. That's APTIVE. LinkedIn/whatever/Jason P. Carroll. So get the P initial, because there's like a million other Jason Carrolls. From CNN reporters to country or country musicians to felons. So yeah, don't get me confused with any of them. Jason P. Carroll. That's probably the best ways to come connect.
No, that's neat. Well, I've really enjoyed the conversation, Jason. Thanks
Same.
for your time today.
Thank you for joining us. Remember that by embracing vulnerability, trusting our intuition, and approaching challenges with compassion, we not only strengthen our teams, but also pave the way for a future where collaboration thrives. If you're hungry for more insights, strategies, and research on collaboration, head over to thefutureofteamwork.com. There, you can join our mailing list to stay updated with the latest episodes and get access to exclusive content tailored to make your team thrive. Together, we can build the future of teamwork. Until next time.